All right, Norm. Well, thank you for hopping on the show today. It's great to have you on here. But to start off, I mean, I know we've visited a fair amount, but would you share your background in the ranching industry with the rest of the audience?
Sure. Well, a little bit about myself, Shay. I'm a fourth generation rancher. We've been chasing cows around for quite a while, and my son is actually fifth generation. So it's kind of in the family, I guess. Um, my wife and I and family ran a ranch in Southwest Alberta in what we call the Porcupine Hills, and that's some fairly rugged ranch land, just about all native grass, and just a fabulous place to manage. Um, while I was at uh, at that place, I also did some volunteer work for Alberta Beef Producers and Western Stock Growers Association. And I still sit on the board of governors with Western Stock Growers, and we're actually working on a project right now where we take the environmental services that ranchers produce and put them into an exchange. So still heavily involved. And of course, I also manage and own and manage RangeWard Incorporated, which is really all about portable electric fence.
Awesome. So, with that portable electric fence, that ties back into your experience with some regenerative grazing practices, and that's what I really kind of want to visit with you about today. So, would you talk about when you became involved with some of those regenerative grazing practices?
Sure. When I was at university, I took animal science and grazing management, but it wasn't until about 10 years after that that I had an opportunity to be with Alan Savory for a week. There was a big paradigm shift there about day 2 or 3. And it was really great because I had that background from university, but all the holistic things that Alan brought into the equation. Um, so that's kind of where we started. And back in the early 2000s, I suppose, we decided to get pretty serious about our grazing practices. Of course, holistic management isn't necessarily about grazing, but certainly grazing is one of the tools that you could use for holistic management. And we had about 40 paddocks or fields spread out over about 8,000 acres. And we wanted to get a little more serious. So we developed some portable electric fence. But about that time, we also changed from cow-calf operation. We ran about 500 cows. And then we changed over to a yearling operation for summer. And that was pretty cool. It was a fun project. And at the time, we needed to do some portable electric fence, and there wasn't anything on the market. So it's like, hey, we'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we'll put it together on a trailer. And that's really where we started. That's probably a good 14 years ago now. At the time, with the cows, we were probably doing about 15 to maybe 20,000 pounds of animal per acre per day. And then when we switched over and did some portable electric fence, we were able to get into that, I suppose, maybe 50 to 100,000 pounds of animal per acre per day. And that really started to change things. We saw more of everything, like more of above ground grass, more diversity, more wildlife. And then when we did some soil work, we were seeing quite a bit in the soil change, some more microbial activity, of course. And that was what was giving us our boost, was the microbial activity and the water retention in soil that started to put everything together. So we started off, we had these yearlings. We went from 500 cows. The first time we bought about 1,000 yearlings, and we thought that was about the right mix. 4 years later, we're up to a couple thousand yearlings, and then grazing dry cows in the wintertime as well. And it just really started to come together. And part of it was our electric fence. And of course, part of it is, or the big part of it is, we were able to control time. So the amount of time that we were able to graze in each paddock through the summer.
Well, awesome. That's an awesome story. It's great to hear, how you've progressed your operation through that time you spent with Alan Savory. So, talking
Mm.
more on the soil health side, would you share the 5 principles of soil health and what those kind of look like for ranchers?
Sure. And this is, I mean, these are really Gabe Brown's principles, and of course, Gabe's pretty close to where you live,
Hmm.
and he's done a lot of work with just Gabe, and then of course with his partners now with Understanding Ag. So I'm not a, I'm just not going to give it back to you again. I kind of mixed a little bit of Gabe Brown and a little bit of Alan Savory, a little bit of Jim Garish, kind of all wrapped in together. And we watched those guys. We participated in a lot of courses with those guys, so it's been really good. But one of the things Gabe talks about is to reduce bare ground. And from a rancher's perspective, it's like, well, I don't farm, so I really don't have any bare ground. But that's really not correct. I see a lot of operations where um, the ranch is in a what we call a brittle environment. There's erratic rainfall, high evapotranspiration, and and not enough grazing or not enough integration of animals. And that's one of Gabe's principles as well, is integrate livestock.
Hmm.
But you see a lot of bare ground. And when you look out as you drive by, you see a lot of grass. But when you get into the grass, you take some of that thatch away between the plants, and some of it's really bad. Some of it's has a lot of bare ground between plants. So, so one of the things that grazing does is help to reduce the bare ground. So there's more plants that come up between the grass species that are there. And we did that on our place. We actually did Transex. 5 years later, we had about 20% more plants. And what's interesting is we had about 20% more of the native plants that were in that grass community. So that was a big win. And of course, Gabe talks about living roots all the time. So as we're able to increase the diversity and the number of plants on that ranch land, we had more and more plants there. We had more and more roots in the soil there. Even in the wintertime, in our winter, I mean, in that operation, might have a foot of snow one day, and then we might have a Chinook wind, which we're famous for in that part of the world, and we may have nothing for a while, kind of like a Wyoming type operation. And you could go in January, you could go and there'd be some heavy grass cover, and you could push that aside, and there would still be green shoots in that tuft of grass. So winter grazing was a big part of what we were doing there as well. So that's kind of like living roots there all the time. And Gabe relates things back to, you have a lot of living roots all the time. And really what you're allowing those plants to do is to take sunlight and suck in some carbon dioxide. And we have water retention because of those plants, both on top of the soil and in the ground. And that's a big difference from a ranch land that has some old grass tufts. You'll see the grass kind of get a gray or a dark brown, black almost color. And that's really just plants oxidizing literally into the air. So we were able to change some of that. And of course, with the extra cows that we got, or the extra steers, we also got a lot of extra wildlife as well. So it was starting to change. I thought, egotistically, I guess I was a pretty good grass manager when I got out of university. And it really wasn't until we started to put all of those components together and really start to move forward. The steers, when we switched over, that was just a really easy way to accomplish that. So that was one of the tools that we brought in as well. So really, if we go back to holistic management, really what we were doing was we were managing the water cycle, we were managing some of the mineral cycle, which today will be, everybody talks about carbon and carbon sequestration in the soil. and we were managing succession. I mean, we had a lot of new plants, new growth coming, different plants. And of course, the more plants we had, the more sunlight and carbon dioxide we were able to suck out of the air as well. So all of those things started to come together. We started to have more of a working environment. And if you look at some of Gabe Brown's principles, the 5 principles, and you look a little bit over at holistic management, they're really part of the same sort of principles that are going on. So reducing bare ground, having plants there all the time, integrating some other animals that could be cattle, sheep. In our case, we integrated a lot of elk for the winter, which was, just sort of came with the territory. But we started to put that environment in a better position.
I think that's something that I really appreciate about looking at, proper grazing strategies is it's not only how is it improving the land for, your livestock's grazing purposes, but how is it improving the whole ecosystem as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really neat about it. So
yeah, and once we were able to control time, which was really what we were doing with our portable fence, then all those factors came together. And I mentioned before that our cattle organization was working on the environmental services and maybe enter those into an exchange. And you were just saying, Shay, that all these other services come along with proper grazing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of other services that get produced. Really, cattle, as somebody said, cattle save the planet. I think it's really going to come back to that. Those animals that are on the landscape, especially in brittle environments, it's really about starting to regenerate some of that landscape again.
Well, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about overgrazing. So how would you describe what overgrazing is?
Well, it could be staying in a paddock too long, but really what's going on is the grazing animal is coming back to graze the same plant before the plant's recovered. So you'll see a situation in your pastures where it's overgrazed in one spot and it may be underutilized in another spot. So that tends to happen, but really it's about the recovery time. And of course, that's why we started with our portable electric fence, was so we could control time. Jim Garish talks about fencing into smaller and smaller increments of time, not smaller increments of acreage, but smaller increments of time. So really, if we're extending our recovery periods so that the plant has the chance to recover, I mean, in simplistic terms, when the plant gets grazed, it will take some energy from its roots and regrow the canopy. And then once the canopy is regrown, it will redo the roots again. So that's pretty simplistic. But what you see in overgrazing is the plant gets grazed, it sacrifices some of its roots to regrow the canopy again. And it does that over and over and over again. And what you do is you get a shrinking root. The roots just get shorter and shorter and shorter. And then you'll see, well, in Western Canada, Western US this year, lots of drought conditions. And then those plants with really short roots, all of a sudden, everybody gets into trouble in a real hurry. So longer roots, you're able to tap into more moisture. And of course, the longer roots come with all kinds of other benefits, like more fungi and more bacteria. That microbiome in the soil starts to benefit together. So it's really, overgrazing causes a lot of things, right? And sometimes you'll see it. Sometimes you'll see it, for instance, in say a genetics or a purebred operation. Guys are just super good on genetics, and they might have 2 or 3 or 4 different cattle lines that they're trying to do. And in general terms, you need about 35, 40 paddocks for the summer. So they get into trouble sometimes. They might need 40 paddocks for each grazing group then. So then maybe 3 grazing groups, all of a sudden you're up to like 90 or 120 paddocks. So you see it in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's just remote locations. It's hard to move cattle. It's hard to control that recovery time. So we see it out all kinds of places, and it's interesting where ranchers are pretty innovative. And once they get going on ranching or on grazing techniques, making smaller and smaller increments of time, they can do some pretty cool things. So it's fun to be part of it. We just have a little piece of the portable electric fence market that helps them out. But once people make a change, they do this paradigm shift, is what we call it. Some pretty cool stuff starts to happen on the environment.
Right. So when we look back at some of those improvements, those cool improvements on the environments, all the cool stuff you were talking about, you mentioned that you had about a 20% increase in native grasses. How long does it take to see some of those improvements? Because it is more work when you're having to move paddocks, right? But how long does it take to see those improvements to kind of at least make it feel like it's worth it? Because it is worth it. The data's there, but what's the timeline on that?
Yeah, exactly. And we have people that come to us, and maybe their first time they want to start to manage this way. And even if you took one field and divided it in half, that's a significant difference. So even dividing in half, you've lengthened that recovery time for that plant right off the bat. And you can get into some portable electric fence for not very much money if you're going to start there, just dividing the field in half. When I talked about our yearling operation, we went from 1,000 steers to about 2,000 steers. That took about 4 years. And it was still just going straight up for us. So once it gets started, it's pretty interesting. You may have smaller increments of improvements, and then maybe you have one of those years where everything comes together. You've got sunshine, you've got lots of water, lots of rainfall, you've got the animals, you've got some of the fence put in, some of the infrastructure. And what you'll see then is some dramatic increases in production. And you'll go to a whole new level, and then maybe it gets dry again. And it's harder to do that production, but you're at a new level, a higher level. And you kind of, you increase small increases from there again. And then you maybe in 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, you'll hit that really ideal condition. And then you'll go up to a new level again. So, I mean, we saw that in 4 years, but we had some of the infrastructure already put in place. Our portable electric fence was usually cutting fields in half or into thirds. Through the summer, we would move probably about 80 times through the summer months. That would be May to October. So we were always on the move. We were pretty careful. We were after gain on our steers. So we were probably taking about 25% of the plant material as we grazed. The first day into a new paddock, maybe we could do maybe 2 pounds or a little bit, maybe 2.2 pounds of gain on those steers. If we stayed past day 3 or even 4, that gain on those steers would come down dramatically, like down to maybe 1.2, 1.4 pounds a day. So we were on the move, and we left lots of material behind. And then we made a deal with our neighbor actually to come with his dry cows for November, December, January. So we're into a dormant season now. We were able to lengthen out our moves and our time in recovery times now because the plant isn't growing anymore. And we would bring cows back in. And even at that, we were probably still leaving about half of the material that we needed for next spring, of course. So.
All right, so when we look at this from a mindset standpoint, what is the most limiting mindset that ranchers can have when it comes to adopting these practices?
Yeah, and as we go do a lot of forage association work, a lot of consulting with people, and I've started a book that's 101 reasons I didn't do it, but there's lots. But it's not to make fun of everybody, but it's a challenge when you first start. Right, you've got electric fence that a lot of people don't like. You've got one wire electric fence that people are concerned doesn't keep their cattle in. We've got, you go into the store and there's like 1,000 different parts, electric parts. It's pretty overwhelming when you first start. But we help a lot of people get started, and sometimes it's just that one paddock that you cut in half. So it's a little bit of a mindset. I said when I took that Alan Savory course, it took me 2 or 3 days to get to a position where what Alan calls a paradigm shift, right? Mm-hmm. So we're leaving more material behind on the grass. People sometimes think we're leaving too much. There's that electric fence thing they have to get over a little bit. It's like, no, that'll never keep cattle in, but yeah, it does. There's the problems that come with it. Some people have had some older energizers like 15, 20 years ago that didn't work very well. All energizers put out about 9 to 10,000 volts, but it's really the joules of energy that you're after. So buy an energizer that has lots of joules on it, like 6, 18, 40. There's Gallagher has one that's 100 joules. And they talk about 100 miles of fence with that one. But make sure you get a proper energizer. Make sure you're grounded. The energizer is grounded properly, and we show a lot of people how to test for that. One of our trailers actually comes with an energizer that you can turn the energizer off or on from anywhere on the fence with a little handheld reader. That's pretty cool because there's a lot of people just absolutely hate getting shocked. So that's a pretty cool feature. We have a custom grazing at my place for the summer, and I guess I've been around long enough. I will move my fence hot, and we move about twice a day usually. So there's a big gap there. And then there's the neighbor thing, right? There is a little culture. We talk about, when my neighbors go by my place when they go for coffee at 6 in the morning in town, they'll see grass up, they'll see grass trampled, grass eaten, dung and urine everywhere, and they're so used to looking at a monoculture, and it's like, oh, that's just terrible. And when the rancher guys go by, it's like, oh, that just looks fabulous, right? So there's a little bit of that going on. There's a little bit of maybe cowboy culture. Can I ride my horse out there with electric fences everywhere? So there's a little bit of that. We've got some clients that train horses all the time, and they use their horses to go out and move fence. So they've kind of integrated the two things together. So it's do you want to do it? And if you can think about, going from 1,000 steers to 2,000 steers, that's like buying another ranch the same size for the cost of some portable electric fence. So we're all squeezed as ranchers. The margin is low. Can we make more money? Can we make the environment richer? And can we put some money in my pocketbook at the same time? And the answer is certainly can. So money is a big driver as well.
Well, thank you for going through and explaining, maybe different objections or really just concerns for different styles of operations. Now, is there anything else you'd like to add today? I know Neil is going to talk about RangeWard and the different trailers after you're done, but is there anything else you'd like to add, Norm?
Yeah, there's lots of really great people out there. I talked a little bit about Gabe and Jim Garish, but there's Nicole Masters, there's Christine Nichols. Those are both really good soils people. There's some forage associations here in Canada, where we are across Western Canada. There are some of those down in the US. Again, join a forage association and just kind of hang out, see what's going on. There's some really cool associations that are moving forward quite a bit. There's lots of stuff on YouTube. And go to Shay's podcast too. I mean, there's information everywhere, right? And as long as you can run your computer and get onto Google, you're going to learn something. So the forage associations or a group are pretty important. When I took my course with Alan Savory, one of the things he really encouraged was to join or make a management club afterwards. And that was really important. You need the support of someone, some other mentor in the community will be there. There's lots of people now that you can go to. And you need to have that support. You need to have somebody to say, you know, Norman, you're a little crazy for doing that. But that's okay, because this is what we need to move forward on. So those are pretty important.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much for being on the show today. I really appreciate all your input and really sharing your story on the regenerative grazing side and everything you've learned from your mentors in that area.
Well, thanks, Shay. This has been enjoyable, and keep your podcast going. That's just a super way to get information out.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for hopping on today. And to get started, would you talk about, who you are and what's your background in agriculture, just so the audience knows a little bit about yourself, Neil?
Okay. Well, my name is Neil Thorsteinson. I work with RangeWard electric fence equipment, and my background in agriculture is I don't have a whole bunch. I've always been around it. I've never gotten into it on a big scale. It's always been on more of a hobby farm, hobby ranch scale. We've always had some form of animals around. We're a team roping family, so we've always got horses around and roping cattle and sometimes sheep. Whatnot. We've got a quarter section that we custom graze here at home, and I've ridden in many community pastures and took agriculture courses in college, that kind of thing. So I guess you wouldn't call me a large scale rancher, but I've always been in agriculture, different levels throughout my life.
Well, that's cool. And oftentimes it's important to have varying levels, varying involvement with species, and whether it's a hobby or a full-time gig, it's all awesome. Mm-hmm. So you said you worked for RangeWard. Do you want to talk a little bit about what RangeWard is as a company?
Yeah, you betcha. It's essentially what it is. It's a manufacturing company that builds portable solar electric fencing units. That being said, a lot of the reason we're building portable electric fencing units is for the soil health aspect side of it too. So it's not just a sales company or a manufacturing company. There's a huge regenerative agricultural background pushing these trailers along. That's kind of the reason we build trailers. We promote soil health, and in doing that, we're just supplying a tool that might make it easier for the producers to do that. Okay. Essentially, that's what it all boils down to.
Okay, so talk a little bit about this tool or this electric fencing unit. For those folks that are listening just via the audio form, and even on the video today, they won't see it directly, but maybe we can throw something up on social media where they can see it. But what does that fencing unit do? What problems does that help solve for ranchers?
Oh, well, there's many tools or many reasons or jobs for each one of these machines. But one of the main problems that they would solve is having the ability to throw up a temporary fence when one is needed. For an example, the whole kind of the starting base of RangeWard is when years ago in the late 90s, Norm, our owner, the company owner, he ranched down at Granham, Alberta. They did a big grass fire go through and burnt up a whole bunch of their fences. So they're permanent barbed wire fences. So they're in a pickle. So to get back on track or keep his cattle contained, he threw up single strand electric fence. In doing that, he thought, I want to stay away from setting up permanent fences from this point on. So he went looking around to see what was on the market for portable electric fencing units. With no luck, there was nothing out there. So he's very innovative and inventive himself. So he built himself a couple of machines, which consequently are our first kind of our flagship machines, what we call our power grazers. So we put a few of those to use on his ranch, not only to set up perimeter fences, but also start managing the grazing within his fields. So it wasn't just perimeter fencing, he was using them to manage the grazing. Over time, from that point on, neighbors seen his equipment, his trailers, they wanted one, he builds another one, and then all of a sudden it snowballs and he's building trailers. So I guess that kind of how it started.
So with these trailers, are they designed where they only can put up one strand of wire at a time, or is it multiple? What are their fencing capabilities?
Okay, yeah, no, good question. Typically it's single strand. Our power grazer machine, which is the big, like I said, it's our flagship machine. It was the first one. It was designed to be used on large landscape ranches. Being in southern Alberta, where Norm was from, he built a machine that was adequate or set up enough fence on his large landscapes. So it's capable of doing 20 or 30 miles of single strand electric fence. Our smaller unit, the small machine just slightly smaller than the power grazer, is our Razor grazer. It also comes complete with everything you need to go electric fencing. I mean, both trailers have Energizer solar panel, the 12-volt deep cycle heavy duty, deep cycle battery, the step-in pigtail posts, and a roll of our power braid reflective rope. So they all have the same tools, essentially, just different scales. The Razor grazer also is set up with typically a single strand application, but it does have the ability to set up a 2-strand fence as well. Yeah. And right now we're actually in the design phase. More than the design phase, we're in the testing phase of our Power Shepherd, which is our sheep machine, which would be a 3 or 4-strand electric fence trailer.
Okay, well, that's cool. So you talk about these units. Do they have to be pulled behind four-wheelers, side-by-sides, pickups? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, no, all of the above. They have a removable hitch on the 2 trailers, the Razor grazer and the power grazer, or 3 trailers and the Power Shepherd, the sheep machine. So you can pull them behind a quad or a side-by-side or your pickup. The power grazer actually has a couple more features to it as well. It's got fork pockets on the back end where you can just pick it up with a skid steer and forks, or your tractor with pallet forks on it and move it around that way if you choose. It's also got 3-point hitch pins on it. So if you've got a nice little 40 or 50 horsepower tractor and rough landscape, that's a really good option to, pick it up and pack it around on the back of your tractor rather than, the power grazer weighs about 1,100 pounds. So if you're going up and down hills, it might be safer to carry it with a tractor than perhaps getting pushed down the hill if your side-by-side is too light. So that's how we move them around.
Okay, so what's the return on investment with the tool like this?
Well, it depends on the application, really, and the tool that's being purchased. There's kind of 2 ways of looking at it. You can see a real quick return on investment if the machine is bought, solely for the purpose of extending your grazing season. We saw a lot of that happen this year. A lot of Western Canada and the northern states went through a drought, which is no secret. So if anything can be done to extend that grazing season and save on feed and fuel, obviously is going to be a quicker return on investment. So, in a kind of a cow herd with, say, 250 cows, if you were to extend your grazing season out a month or 6 weeks, you might pay for your machine in that first year, in that first season, actually. Where another form of return on investment might be a little bit slower paced, but it's still a return, is you are using that machine to manage your grazing with your goal on increasing your soil health. So obviously increased soil health over time increases the productivity of your land, which increases the stocking rate of that land. So it's possible to increase the animals without increasing the land base. So a return nonetheless, it's just a little bit slower than the first one I pointed out.
Okay. Say a producer wants to purchase this. Is it available in only Canada or is it available in all 50 states as well? What does your area look like?
Oh, okay. Well, we manufacture and store equipment in the Red Deer, Alberta area, and as well as down at Nanton, Alberta, which is in the south of the province at Norm's Place. So that's 2 points in Alberta that we hold equipment. We also have farm and ranch dealers throughout Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. We're also setting up a similar ranch dealer network throughout the states. That's kind of my main target going into 2022. We've got a couple of them on board with us already, one in Montana, just brought one on in North Dakota, possibly South Dakota, and hopefully in Nebraska here within a few months. No equipment being stored in the States right now, but we certainly do ship to any state. We ship anywhere in North America at this point, out of those two bases being Red Deer and Nanton.
Okay. So is this something where you allow producers to do like a trial with it and see if they like it or do demos on them? What does that look like?
Well, a big part of my job is going around visiting with producers. Producers, forage and grazing associations is a big one as well. Conservation groups. I spend a lot of time with them, showing them our trailers, taking the trailers to site, setting it up with them, perhaps setting up a trial period with them where they use the machine for a month or 2 months or whatever we decide. So no, all of that is possible. We're actually doing a couple of trials with colleges here in Alberta, one in the north up at Fairview, Alberta, on I believe they're grazing cornstalk with one of our razor grazers. And another similar trial down at Vermilion, Alberta, which is they're using a razor grazer for a swath grazing project. So no, I do a lot of demo days where there might be a group of people just come to look at the machine and then they go home and think about it, and call later if they would like to place an order. And then there's also possibilities where we set up some trials every now and then to do that as well. Yeah.
Okay, so where can producers go to find more information about your different trailers that you offer or contact you?
Okay, so we just gone through our website and updated it with lots of new videos, frequently asked questions, testimonies. You can see all of that at rangeward.ca. You'll also see our full product line there as well. So you'll see our power grazer, our razor grazer, which I've talked a lot about. You'll see another tool called the power arm, which is a very popular tool, which actually is the back end or the power electric reel portion of the razor grazer. So we sell them independently as well. The people that would be interested in those power arms are producers that already have an electric fence system in place, and they're just looking for a better way to strip graze or cross fence throughout their grazing or throughout their pastures. I'm sorry. So you'll see the
Okay.
power arm, and we're just getting on. You'll see under new products as well, our Power Shepherd and Bison razor grazer. So we've got a lot of equipment there to look at. We also have a Facebook and LinkedIn page you can follow us on.
Well, awesome. Thank you for being on the show today. Is there anything else you want to add or share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, not really. Just I really want to put out there that you'll see our contact information on all three platforms there, our website, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I could talk about this equipment for days and days. I love this stuff. So please give me a call whenever you feel like it, or questions come up, concerns, just general information. Happy to help.
Well, awesome. And I will make sure that I get your information in the show notes as well so that they can easily contact you right after listening. But
Okay,
with that,
awesome.
thanks for being on the show today, Neil.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for the invitation, Shay. Appreciate it.